Ladies and gentlemen, Angelique Power of the Skillman Foundation.
Hi, everybody. We've been talking about education all morning long throughout every panel, and yet we haven't heard yet from the folks that are actually inside of the schools, that are working in our after-school programs, to hear their perspective on what's happening. So, a riddle. What is the best known story about Detroit that's also the least known story about Detroit? I'll answer that for you. The best known story is that Detroit is a place of makers, of innovators, of visionaries who are setting the pace for the rest of the world. The least known is that that's actually happening inside of our education system. In Detroit, education happens inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom. It happens in traditional public schools, it happens in charter schools. And while we often tell the story of what has not been going well, we rarely tell the story about all of the sparks of innovation that's happening here. And that is our aim for the panel this morning. At Skillman, you watched this video. We launched the Visionary Awards this year, where we fund individuals who make up the constellation of education change makers that are working at a systems level to create change so that the schools that are here, the after-school programs that are run, they change with the innovation that's happening in Detroit. We look at this as a 10-year plan where we want to ensure that the systems are being designed for Detroiters by Detroiters, so that when we get to that 10 years of innovation, we ensure that the long-time Detroiters that are here today are here tomorrow. So, for instance, on some of this innovation, did you know that this superintendent, who is sitting next to me, Dr. Nikolai Vitti, that the DPSCD school system is outperforming state averages on post-pandemic improvement in literacy and in mathematics? That is huge. Yes, thank you for applying. Did you know that DPSCD offers dual enrollment? So they work really closely with Dr. Espy and Wayne State. They work really closely with Lawrence Tech so that all high schools offer career pathways directly for students. Did you know that there's been curriculum that's been created here in Detroit that is not only replicated across Detroit, but is replicated nationally? That curriculum is created by Silver Moore on our panel. And did you know that we have middle schoolers and high schoolers in 20 public schools that have formed a debate team, and they regularly debate current city ordinances? I could make comments. I hear Mary laughing. I could make comments about that, but I will say that Umoja Debate League, and Jerjuan Howard is the lead of it, and he will join us shortly. That debate league is run by an organization where the entire executive team is under 30 years old. So Dr. Vitti, let's start with you. Hi.
Hi.
You are the longest running superintendent in the largest school district in Michigan, Detroit Public School Community District, serving over 50,000 students. You know, I was saying to you just now backstage, I feel like I'm your Flavor Flav. I'm like, you gotta know what's going on in our schools under your tenure. So what's your big vision for public education in Detroit?
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here with you and to talk about our district. Hi. Usually I'm the one late. So
my apologies.
Oh, you're good. The vision that I have is a big one, and then yet it's a practical one. You know, at the end of the day, the challenge in Detroit around public education has not been the fault of children. We know our children are gifted. We know that they're talented. They've had an opportunity gap. It's not a talent gap in the city, it's an opportunity gap. And that opportunity gap is filled by traditional public education, and it can be. And it is the scaled system that can actualize talent. But it has not always done that. It has done that for decades for individual children, groups of children, but not all children, especially over the last 2 decades or so, mainly because of emergency management, inequitable funding, and at times poor leadership. So my vision would be that when children enter DPSED, and hopefully they're with us from pre-K all the way to 12th grade, that we empower them to actualize their God-given talent. And that means that they are confident, that they have a strong voice, they understand what their talent is and what it's not, and through the course of 12, 13 years, they're honing that talent, they're honing that ability, and the school system serves as a springboard for college, the world of work, and life and civic engagement in general. That's the vision. And I think we've been working extremely hard over the last 8 years, and you know what you haven't read in the paper is scandal, fraud, corruption, board members fighting with each other, board members fighting with the superintendent. And that's a good thing because we're working and we're focusing on the right things. And so in 8 years, you know, when I started, we had 400 teacher vacancies. We opened up this school year with maybe 30. Only 5 special education vacancies. Average teacher salaries have increased over $20,000 in 8 years. Our beginning teachers were at 38,000. Today they're at about 53,000. Our most veteran teachers were at about 68,000. Today they're at about 93,000. You know, in 5 years, all of our schools will have modern HVAC systems. Yes, air conditioning. I know we say, well, you might say, I went to school, we didn't have air conditioning. It's 2024. Our children need air conditioning. You know, we have art and music in every school. We have physical education in every school. We have dual enrollment programs, as was mentioned, in every school. Our enrollment increased for the first time in 2 decades by 6,000 students. You know, the market share in the city is moving towards students going to traditional public education. So the market share, meaning pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, more students are choosing DPSED than any other choice over the last 8 years or so. And so I say all of that to also say we still got a lot of work to do. And most importantly, from a student achievement point of view, and then I'll move on, as was mentioned, when you look at performance after the pandemic, DPSED has shown more improvement in at and above grade level performance in reading and math than the state average, than on average city charter schools, on average suburban school districts throughout Metro Detroit and the area, and more improvement in college readiness scores, mainly in literacy, and we're at the highest level we've ever been with these new national standards in literacy and math. And that's because we're empowering, supporting our teachers, and empowering, supporting our principals. It's been a combination of support and accountability and support. We've just rebuilt the system to do right by children. And hopefully in some way you can figure out how to support that directly or indirectly. But encouraged to do this work, excited about the future, and it's really about rebuilding the school system in a way that children deserve. And proud to be a leader in that work.
Thank you, Dr. Vitti. Our students need so much in the classroom. They need arts, they need HVAC. But in general, we need an upgrade to the classroom learning and the classroom experience. Education worked well when you could have these jobs where you could come in and work on the line, but this is a different world that we live in now. Silver, education practice is actually your expertise. As I mentioned, you developed curriculum and teacher training called Classroom Clapback. And this is what's actually been integrated across the country now. You also are a leader of curriculum and instruction at UPrep, a charter school district here in Detroit. Yes, okay. Thank you. In Detroit, there are just as many charter schools as there are traditional public schools. Charter schools are also public schools, and there's a lot of innovation that's happening in that space too. Silver, describe classroom learning in 2050.
So within Classroom Clapback, the name is chosen that way because it is my best attempt to clap back at a system of miseducation that doesn't always do Black babies well. And so I clap back through curriculum development, I clap back through professional development and teacher development so that we can create spaces rooted on the belief, particularly here in Detroit, but across the world, that Black child genius is alive and real. Right? Brown children have inherent genius. They are inherently valuable. And how do we make sure that we create educational spaces that are rooted in genius as a baseline? Right? Like that we've never met a child that isn't already genius. So how are we making sure that when they enter the classroom, that they are being presented with opportunities to show off that genius? So as Dr. Vitti mentioned, that there is not a talent gap, but an opportunity gap that students are experiencing. How are we making sure that they actually have access to the rigorous instruction so that they can show off their genius? How are we making sure that they are able to engage with curriculum that shows them, that is culturally responsive, that reflects them, the genius of them, their communities, their families, and everyone that looks like them? How do we make sure that we are in classrooms, that places are creating wonder, are celebrating joy and the brilliance of our students? And so that is what I'm hoping is the future and moving forward in our education space, that we are not coming from a place of deficit, especially in the city of Detroit, but we are coming from a place of genius as the baseline. And cultivating that at every entity of the classroom. So from the moment that you walk into the building, that building should reflect the genius and joy. When they enter into the classroom, what does genius and joy looks like? That means that we don't celebrate silence in the classroom as something that scholars do. They sit there quietly. But like, how are we making sure that we are including a robust conversation in our classroom? How are we making sure that it is not a teacher-centered classroom, but a student-centered classroom? Because students are creators of knowledge as well. They're not just receiving knowledge, but they are inherently genius and brilliant and can contribute ideas in their own right. So as we are moving forward and creating these educational spaces that are able to create equity and liberty and justice, we have to make sure that we are creating spaces that create joy and freedom and love and laughter. Like those have to be what we're going after. If we're going after solely meeting standards, then we're just going to get standard. Our children are genius. They deserve some upgrades. So it has to be beyond just meeting the standard. It has to be in pursuit of joy and brilliance and liberation.
I want to stay on you for a second and talk about teacher training. So joy and brilliance and liberation, it's so important for our young people. And it's needed for teachers who are often under the gun, overworked, working off hours, paying for things out of their own pockets, and often blamed for systemic failures. So how do you approach teacher training now in your work that also allows them to feel that joy and liberation?
I believe the work of any educator is really soul work at the baseline. It's not just a matter of head, but it is very much so a matter of heart. And so a lot of times when we approach professional development, it is, we got to best practice, learn about these skills, but we have to create spaces that allow for the soul work to happen as well, the healing to happen as well, because most educators have trauma stories as well. A lot of us have those days that we wish we could forget, but play in our heads. So we have to be, how do we create spaces that we allow for teachers to do the healing work? Restorative practices are important for our students, you know, to as alternatives to suspensions and all that. But what does restorative practices look like for our educators? Do we have schools in which we are honoring the humanity of our teachers? And so that looks like, what are the expectations for the work? How are we talking to our teachers? How do we allow them to be able to show up fully as themselves? Do I have to be a whole other person to enter this space? I don't want my students to have to shrink to be called a scholar. I shouldn't have to shrink to be called an educator as well, right? Like, so thinking about not just what's in the student handbook, but what's in the employee handbook as well. What do those policies look like as well? And how do we intentionally, not self-care as a buzzword, but like, how do we intentionally create spaces that allow educators to do the soul work of education? How do we allow them to unlearn some things? How do we allow them to deal with the trauma even that comes? Every teacher should be able to have free therapy, right? Like, how do they deal with the things that they come in with in order so they can be their best selves for their children?
Beautiful. Jerjuan, hi.
Hello, good morning.
So, Jerjuan, you've created Umoja Debate League, and we know that so much of the education, we're talking about what happens in the classroom, so much of it happens outside of the classroom. At Skillman Foundation, we know that out-of-school time development for young people is so important. It's where they can learn their agency, their possibilities. Can you talk to us about Umoja Debate League? What made you create this program, and what do you think it offers to young people?
Absolutely. So Umoja Debate League is an organization that teaches Detroit youth how to debate. But debate is just a vehicle. The vehicle that it takes us to is critical thinking, confidence building, self-reflection skills, self-expression skills, and a whole lot of other transferable life skills. And we do that as an after-school program in partnership with Detroit Public Schools and some other charter schools surrounding in the Metro Detroit area. When I started Umoja Debate League, debate played a huge role in my life. Before debate, I wouldn't consider myself shy, but I was pretty chill and laid back. But through debate, I found my voice. And the most interesting part about it, I didn't even know how much of a role it played in my life until I was in college. This is a 10th grade class I took. Looking back, I was able to see that was the origin of confidence. My body language when I speak, my eye contact, my enunciation of words, all of those different skills debate poured into me, and I found that it was a great tool for what I call disguised learning. They're debating, and kids love to argue already, but there's a bunch of other skills that come along with it at the same exact time.
Thank you. We talked earlier on a panel, Anika Goss was talking about some of the changes that are happening in the city. And I think it was Don Rencher from Hudson Weber who mentioned how important systems change work is. And I know, Dr. Vitti, I've heard you talk about that in a way that I think is a little bit different sometimes than other superintendents. If we were to identify just step one that would allow the system to shift and Detroit Public Schools to perform at a different level, what would that step one major hack in the system be?
Equitable funding. This is homecoming, right? So growing up in Metro Detroit, I used to deliver the free press at 5 o'clock in the morning every day. And I'm a history major, so I always, even now, look back at old articles about Detroit, about Michigan. It's interesting. You go back to the 60s, and you see articles about funding and the public school system not being equally, and now we use the word equitably funded, and the fights are the same, and it's usually always linked to race, we're still not equally funding public schools in the state of Michigan. So equal is equal, right? I always say let's get to equal and then let's get to equitable. We need to get to equitable, and for most of you in the room, equal is the same. Equitable is giving more to those that need more. And I don't think we need to we do argue, unfortunately, but we shouldn't be arguing that because of the concentration of poverty in the city and the history of race in this country, we need equitable funding to actualize the talent that our children have with more resources. And so when we talk about systems and processes, the beauty of public education and the beast of education is it serves all children. And it needs to be funded differently to give everyone equal opportunity. And so the first step in creating a stronger system to support families who are facing concentration of poverty, children, families that are facing institutionalized racism in this country, is equitable funding. And you know, still in the state of Michigan, we now have at least what I call a floor. So at minimum, all children are funded at a minimum level. And that was a step in the right direction about a decade ago, but we have no ceiling. And that's the problem in the state of Michigan, is after every district in the state of Michigan has to tax at 18 mills. That's basically a business tax and homeowners that rent out their property. And if you don't get to the minimum amount, then the state kicks in the difference to create a floor. But that ceiling is dependent on the wealth of that district. And as you probably know, most of the wealthier districts are surrounding the city of Detroit. And so those districts have more funding, and it's a combination of, it's really local money that's completely fungible. You can use it for anything. And so you have discrepancies of anywhere from $5,000 per child to $3,000 per child. And that money can be used for everything from teacher salaries to facilities to after-school programming. And so if we're going to finally arrive to the point where we really believe that every child is gifted, every child is talented, and every child has a destiny of greatness, and the public school system is the vehicle to do that, then it needs to be equitably funded. And so we can have great conversations about leadership, how you spend the money, and all of that, but at the end of the day, at the beginning conversation, that start line has to be where all kids are lining up at least at the same place. Economic, racial history doesn't allow that to happen. So the public school system, if funded the right way, can allow children to race appropriately in this highly competitive world that we live in.
You heard earlier that in terms of education, Michigan, according to Kids Count data from Annie E. Casey, is 41st in the nation. And that has actually created a sense of urgency across Michigan that is working with Detroit in a different way. So I think rather than pitting district against district, which we've seen in the past, what there is almost a wholesale realization that we collectively need to work together, the business sector, the public sector, the philanthropic, nonprofit, we need to actually collectively try to do something very bold and different. This equitable funding piece that Dr. Vitti has mentioned, last year in the state budget was the first year that there was something called the Opportunity Index. And that is a weighted funding formula, not fully funded, but it is put in place. There are organizations called Launch Michigan, which are business-led organizations that also work with unions, that also work with teachers' associations. Are you on the board of Launch? Yeah. And so it is this coalition that's working collectively to try to move something forward. I think that that's one of the secret sauce pieces of Detroit and Michigan. There's a collective realization of Umoja, right?
Absolutely.
That we are collectively in this together. Our fate is linked with each other. Let's talk about working with schools, because I've come to homecoming a few times now. And in between things, people always say when they hear what Skillman Foundation does, they'll say, well, how do we work with the schools? We would love to work with X school or this school or do something. What can we do? Umoja Debate League has gone from, how long have you guys been around?
So we were founded in 2021, but programming started in 2022.
So in 2 years, founded 3 years ago, in 2 years you have grown from an initial pilot of 2 to 3 schools? One school to being in 20 schools now. What is the secret?
Well, first I want to give credit to our partners, which is Detroit Public Schools Community District, seeing the need for collective effort to solve some of the problems that we have in our community. Nothing happens in silos, and again, leadership that understands that, that collaborative spirit that must be present to get things done. So hats off to Detroit Public Schools Community District first and foremost for the partnerships. And then secondly, we're able to find a problem that's not a problem, but something that could be solved or enhanced in the schools. Again, I'm in my community present, so I know that students need more critical thinking skills, more confidence building. And so through that, we were able to talk with Detroit Public Schools about what that would look like at a middle school level. Now, there was a high school debate league that was already functioning, but there was no middle school debate league, which was a gap. A lot of our kids began to express themselves, have opinions around 6th or 7th grade. I know exactly that's when I began to think about the world. And so with that, again, that's when my solution hat kind of got put on. We created a curriculum that was very specific to the kids that we were dealing with, the topics that we debate, the things that they actually practice and engage in was all very intentional in terms of curriculum standpoint, and we were able to build it out. Again, there's no secret sauce besides talking to the people that are in positions of power to work together. If everyone is solution-driven and mission-driven, things can get done a lot quicker.
Thank you. The strategy, Skillman strategy, is called people-powered education. And it is a theory of change about how education systems change happens, but it really is a theory of change about how sustainable change happens. And that it is a combination, a 1-2 punch of grassroots and grass tops working collectively together. If the community is left out of policy, then the policy will not be well constructed, nor will it likely be implemented by that same community. And if there is no policy work in terms of solutions, then the solutions will be singular and episodic, as opposed to long-lasting and able to create change. Silver, I think about not just the work that you do in the classroom, but I think about the fact that you have a nonprofit that's been created with your parents and with your sister, and it is rooted in your neighborhood. Can you talk to the expats here a little bit about the energy and the creativity and the hustle and the change that is actually sparked from and living in and created by residents?
Yeah, so my family has an organization, SDM2, Project Education, and our focus is improving literacy for youth, but recognizing that in order to do the work for the youth, we have to do the work for the family. So we are very localized right in the neighborhood. I'm on the same block that I have lived on since the 5th grade. And there's a home there that we have converted into the SDM2 house. In this house, we offer tutoring 3 days out the week, computer access for students to literally come off the bus when they get home from school and have a place where they can get tutoring, have resources, they can get dinner. We offer mentorship programs for boys. Across from the house where I live, which is the SDM2 house, is my parents' house, and a place affectionately called Moore Park, where we have purchased a lot of the side lots in the area and developed so that we have it's a nice little bit of land back there, I would say that. So the last weekend we hosted our annual boys overnight camp. So they were able to pitch tents and stay overnight, but also engage in other critical thinking activities, doing escape rooms, doing financial literacy, simulations, doing some goal setting. And so being able to be community driven, to be able to be the Detroit that always has been Detroit. Right there in that space, the sense of community that comes with every Tuesday. We have our food fair, which essentially is a free farmers market. And people come and load up and are able to shop freely. And today is community dinner. So people from the neighborhood will come together and eat dinner. So if we're going to be able to do this educational work for our children, it is about thinking about what does mom need too? And what does dad need too? And what does grandma and grandpa need as well in order? I heard someone say yesterday, it's not just that it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a whole village. So are the people in the village whole? And they need to be whole in order to raise that child well. So our work, if we're going to do what we need to do to make sure we are supporting students in the classroom, how do we make sure that the village that supports them is whole as well? And so within our organization, right, localized on the actual block, we're trying to do the work to make everyone whole.
Thank you all for telling the accurate story about what is actually happening. the sparks and the innovation that's happening in the education system here in Detroit. We have 20 seconds left, so this is really fast. We are talking to expats. What is the way that expats can get involved? We'll go down the line. Silver.
If you got dollars, give them to the people doing the work.
Dollars given to people who are doing the work. Okay. Jerjuan.
Begin to work with the institutions that are around your community, the churches, the schools, the businesses. It's all a whole entire combined effort that must take place.
Dr. Vitti.
Vote for political candidates that see the bigger picture and understand how resources can help the most vulnerable to recreate and develop systems and processes.
And tell the right story about all the things that are happening here in Detroit. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
The picks are in. 6 new Lions reporting for duty.
Terrian Arnold,
Ennis Rakestraw Jr.,
Giovanni Manu, Sione Baki.
And ready to roar.
We trying to win that Super Bowl, Detroit, and we're going to do it.
Fans showing up and smashing records.
2024 NFL Draft has now broken the all-time record!
And the Lions may be off the clock, but Detroit is just getting started.
NBA All-Star Game, NHL All-Star Game, you can count on them. They're coming.